Hello Year 3, Mrs Thomas here, and we're carrying on with reading Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and we're on chapter 24, Verruca in the Nut Room. Mr Wonka rushed on down the corridor. The nut room, it said on the next door they came to. All right, said Mr Wonka. Stop here for a moment and catch your breath, and take a peek through the glass panel of this door, but don't go in. Whatever you do, don't go in the nut room. If you go in, you'll disturb the squirrels. Everyone crowded around the door. Oh, look, Grandpa, look, cried Charlie. Squirrels, shouted Verruca Salt. Crikey, said Mike TV. It was an amazing sight. 100 squirrels were seated upon high stools around a large table. On the table there were mounds and mounds of walnuts, and the squirrels were all working away like mad, shelling the walnuts at a tremendous speed. These squirrels are specially trained for getting the nuts out of walnuts, Mr Wonka explained. Why use squirrels? Mike TV asked. Why not use Oompa Loompas? Because, said Mr Wonka, Oompa Loompas can't get walnuts out of walnut shells in one piece. They always break them in two. Nobody except squirrels can get walnuts whole out of walnut shells every time. It is extremely difficult, but in my factory I insist upon only whole walnuts. Therefore I have to have squirrels to do the job. Aren't they wonderful? The way they get those nuts out, and see how they first tap on each walnut with their knuckles to make sure it's not a bad one. If it's bad, it makes a hollow sound, and they don't bother to open it. They just throw it down the rubbish chute. There, look, watch that squirrel nearest to us. I think he's got a bad one now. They watched the little squirrel as he tapped on the walnut shell with his knuckles. He cocked his head to one side, listening intently. Then suddenly he threw the nut over his shoulder into a large hole in the floor. Hey, Mummy, shouted Verruca Salt suddenly. I decided I want a squirrel. Get me one of those squirrels. Don't be silly, sweetheart, said Mrs Salt. These all belong to Mr Wonka. I don't care about that, shouted Verruca. I want one. And all I've got at home is 2 dogs and 4 cats and 6 bunny rabbits and 2 parakeets and 3 canaries and a green parrot and a turtle and a bowl of goldfish and a cage of white mice and a silly old hamster. I want a squirrel. All right, my pet, said Mrs Salt soothingly. Mummy'll get you a squirrel just as soon as she possibly can. But I don't want any old squirrel, Verruca shouted. I want a trained squirrel. At this point, Mr Salt, Verruca's father, stepped forward. Very well, Mr Wonka, he said importantly, taking out a wallet full of money. How much do you want for one of those squirrels? Name your price. They're not for sale, said Mr Wonka, answered. She can't have one. Who says I can't? Shouted Verruca. I'm going to get one myself this very minute. Don't, said Mr Wonka, quickly, but he was too late. The girl had already thrown open the door and rushed in. The moment she entered the room, 100 squirrels stopped what they were doing and turned their heads and stared at her with small, black, beady eyes. Verruca stopped also and stared back at them. Then her gaze fell upon a pretty little squirrel nearest to the end of the table. The squirrel was holding a walnut in its paws.